Well, that is my Stranger Things inspired intro. And when I was putting that together, I couldn't help but think this last couple of years of ministry have been pretty strange. It feels like we've all been living in a bit of an upside down. All right, enough with the Stranger Things references. I want to say thank you to Stephen for the opportunity to be a part of this year's Church Online Summit. If we've never met, my name is Jason Moore and my ministry is Midnight Oil Productions, and I am passionate about creating deep, meaningful, creative worship, and I especially am interested in how to do that in a hybrid or both and way. This talk today will be based on my Amazon best-selling book, Both and: Maximizing Hybrid Worship Experiences for In-Person and Online Engagement. And if you want to go deeper than we have time to do in this talk, you can grab a copy at the link on the screen. It's hard to believe we're going into year 3 of this pandemic. And I've had so many people ask me a question that kind of drives me crazy, and that question is, can we stop doing this now?
What?
And my answer is an emphatic no, we can't stop doing this now, because we are reaching more people and new people through our hybrid ministry. I like to think of this as a Great Commission moment. Of course, we still have to figure out that whole baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit thing. It's a little harder to do online, but I really believe there is an incredible opportunity before us right now. So today, I want to talk to you about what I call both and engagement. Both and is the idea that we would create an experience of worship for people both in the room and at home where everyone feels like they're the primary audience. In other words, we want to create worship where people at home are not simply spectators or observers of what's happening in the room. Let's talk about what online worship often looked like before the pandemic. We would welcome people to the room, and then we'd give a little nod to the camera and say, hey, if you're watching at home, thanks for being in worship with us today. And then we'd more or less go back to an entire hour of talking to the room. We might say goodbye at the end, but oftentimes we wouldn't even do that. Now, that was perfectly acceptable back then. We didn't have any other models. In fact, I liked being able to worship from vacation or home or wherever I might be. But when the pandemic hit and we locked down and we had to shelter in place at home, everything changed about the way we did worship. We brought the camera closer. We looked directly into it. We talked to people at home because there was no one in the room to talk to. And I think we woke people up to what it felt like to actually be participants in worship online rather than just watching the people in the room worship. And so, friends, I think we face a critical moment in the life of the church right now as more and more people have come back to the building. I think we've lost sight of and lost some of the gains that we made during the pandemic. So let's talk about 7 ways to create more engagement for your both and worship. The first is to create an intimate experience for everyone, both those in the room and at home. And let's be honest, that's easy to do in the room. You can walk up to someone, you can look them in the eye, you can shake their hand, you can share a cup of coffee, all of those sorts of things. Which means that we have to go out of our way to do that for those who are online, make them feel connected. One of my favorite models to point people to and how to do better hybrid worship, oddly enough, is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers was great at making you feel like he was talking directly to you. He looked right into the camera. He got close to the camera. Not a lot of wide shots, lots of close-ups in that show. So the first thing that I would recommend is that you get the camera closer. That might be a little too close, but closer creates more connection. When you can see facial expressions and read the passion on someone's face, you're going to feel so much more connected than when you are shooting from the back of the room and you can see them from head to toe. Now, some of you might think, well, my people will not let me bring the camera closer. I think we have to reframe the thinking of the technology. That is not a camera in front of me right now. It is not just metal, glass, and microchips. It is a portal into the experience for those who are not gathered in the physical space. We ought to not lament the presence of the camera, but celebrate it. Help your people see that that camera represents X number of people in your worship experience. One tip I often share with folks is to put a camera icon in your notes or in your manuscript, if you're a manuscript preacher, to remind you to look at the camera sometimes. When you preach, you usually preach to the people on your left and on your right and up in the balcony and in the seats way in the back. Remember that the camera represents a significant portion of your audience, of your congregation. You're not filming a television show. You don't have to look at the camera all the time, But from time to time, you've got to lock eyes with that camera and make it so it feels like you're talking to the people who aren't in the room with you.
You talking to me?
The second tip is that you might acquire a small whiteboard, like the kind you put your grocery list on, and put it somewhere near the camera. Write on that whiteboard the number of people that have worshiped with you from Sunday when worship was over until Saturday night, the night before, and that whiteboard will give you a motivation to look up at that camera directly and lock eyes with it from time to time. The second way to increase your engagement in your both and worship is to watch your language. We're not using foul language, but we're using bad language in some of our worship experiences. I want you to consider that there are 3 ways that people participate in your worship if you're live streaming. We've got people right now in the room with you, right now online, and later online as well. But all of our language favors the people in the room. So we'll say things like, let's stand together in worship in this moment. But do we really think that people at home are like getting up and standing in that moment in their living room? Probably not. And if you are a later worshiper, let's say you are catching up with worship on your lunch break on Monday because you work on Sunday, you're certainly not going to stand up. So what if we use different language? What if we instead said something like, if you're here in the building, I want to invite you to stand with us as we worship. And if you're worshiping with us online right now or even at a later time, I'm going to invite you to find a posture that will allow you to fully participate in this moment. Another quick way to say it might be to say, stand in body or in spirit, because I may sit up a little bit straighter on my couch and stand in spirit and not so much in body. We will say things like, good morning, welcome to worship, hope you're having a great Sunday. Well, a lot of people worship outside of Sunday morning now. They worship after the fact. And so morning and Sunday don't really apply to their situation. Now they know that you're not filming it in real time, but you might instead say, welcome to worship, hope you're having a great day.
Good morning! Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
There are 3 words that I would love for us to eliminate from our vocabulary as we think about both and worship. The first is watching worship. We don't want watchers, we want worshipers. So don't say, hey, if you're watching at home today, we're glad you're with us. Instead, let's say, if you're worshiping from home today, or if you're worshiping online with us, we are so glad you're a part of this experience. Let's also not think of folks at home as viewers, but as participants, and then let's invite them to actually participate. The third word that for me is maybe just a personal pet peeve is the word virtual worship. Virtual, in my mind, is simulated. It's not real. So I got a virtual reality headset a couple years ago for Christmas, and my siblings and I all bought one for my dad as well. He lives about 30 minutes away from me. Called me up one day and said, hey Jason, download this roller coaster. I want to ride it with you. So we got in the virtual space together, we started going up the hill, and I didn't feel any sense of nerves or butterflies. As we got to the top of the hill and went over the top of it, I didn't feel any G-forces, any wind in my face. The only thing that was real about that experience was the connection that I felt with my dad in that moment, but it was fully simulated. Friends, our worship online is not a simulated experience of worship or a close proximity. It is actual worship, not virtual. So you might consider eliminating that language from your vocabulary as well. I think it's also important that we think about how people can engage with us in prayer. And again, our language has to work for all 3 groups. If you're worshiping with us here in the building and you'd like to pray with someone, we have members of our prayer team that would love to pray with you here in the building. If you're online right now, you can pray with someone in our chat. And if you are worshiping with us at a later time, you can drop your prayer request into an email and someone will pray for you or even reach out and pray with you if you'd like sometime this week. The third way that you can increase your engagement in your hybrid worship is to create a dialogue with the people worshiping with you online. The first thing I would recommend is that you assign a chat host. The same way that you have greeters at the front door, you need greeters in the chat that welcome people. There's a whole section in my book that we don't have time to get into today that talks about that strategy and how to really live into it. You might think, Jason, we have people that worship at home on smart TVs. How can they chat with us? Well, I want to encourage you to think about inviting them into what I call the dual screen experience. The dual screen experience is the idea that you might put a QR code on the screen or a URL and invite people at home to participate in that way. So if you're worshiping with us from home, I'm going to invite you to get out your phones, turn down the volume, scan that QR code, and participate along with us today in the chat. We're going to ask you to share reflections. We may have a poll or two. We may share prayer requests and so on. But it's a really great way for you to get as much as you can out of this experience. What if we started to engage people in that way?